Hey, what's up? So I want to do like a one-take review of every single sword that I own from the perspective of someone who may not have like $2,000 to drop on an Albion. I bought all of these from Cult of Athena, but had I known what I know now, I probably would have also checked into HEMA supplies. They seem to have some really good options and seem to be pretty authentic with their builds. All of these that you're seeing here are basically name brands. There is one sword here that I don't have anymore, and that would be the Cold Steel two-handed greatsword. And I mean, it was cool. It was pretty badass, but at the same time, like, HEMA Supplies has a two-handed Renaissance sword with a flamberge, however you pronounce that, and it just looks super badass. And I probably would have gotten that instead. So the brands here are Cold Steel, Balaur Arms, which is surprisingly under the radar, and I'm surprised more people aren't talking about these guys. A couple one-offs from Depeeka, Windlass, No Name, Condor, and I don't want to talk about it. I'm going to have a document in the description with all of the brands and the swords with links if I can find them. Some of them may have changed, especially with Balor Arms. Some of these swords have gone through different revisions. This bronze pommel here isn't available anymore, and the 14th century sword does have like a different scabbard now than it used to. So starting off, we got a Cold Steel ribbed shell swept hilt rapier. That's a bit of a mouthful. So I picked this one up because it's the longest production rapier on the market, and that's kind of the point of rapiers. So I wanted to get my hands on one. It's surprisingly heavy, but at the same time, it's really nimble. The point of balance, you can always kind of tell the point of balance if you just wiggle it in your hands and kind of like see how much control it gives you. If it's one thing I have to give Cold Steel, it's that their shit is always super durable. And I've never had anything break on me or start rusting. Next up is the German longsword. Got a pretty brutal pommel there, got a ring guard, has this weird swept hilt design to the guard. Really neat scabbard. It's actually a really nice scabbard. These you can take off if you want. I have no use for these, I just use a frog. One problem I did have is the very tip of the blade came kind of bent, so I had to file that down basically to give it more of a point. But overall, like, this sword is actually like really cool. Visually speaking, this is probably my favorite, and it just like, it feels whippy. It's a bit heavy, but the point of balance doesn't feel too bad. There is some flex to the blade, as there should be with these materials. It's pretty heavy, but I mean, it is kind of nimble. The point of this sword, Cold Steel was trying to get like the weights and distribution right, and I feel like they pretty much nailed it on this one. And it hasn't rusted or anything on me yet. Next up, we have the Italian longsword. Now, keep in mind, there is an MMA variant, and there are differences between the two outside of just this one being blued and this one being raw steel. The non-MMA variant is actually kind of bulky. The handle is really thick, and it feels kind of heavy. I mean, it's whippy, but it feels really heavy and like more of a chopper than anything. As always, the steel hasn't blemished over time or anything like that, and it seems to be really well made. If you want to complain about the threaded pommel, I'll just end you rightly, you know? The MMA is actually a completely different beast. This one is actually way lighter than the non-MMA version, and this is actually one that I've, before I moved here and don't have enough room to swing around, like, I swung this around a lot, and it's actually really fun to swing around. It's really, really like lighter, so it feels more of kind of like a thrusting sword than the non-MMA version. The handle's not as bulky and the profile just feels thinner overall. There's a bit of a side-by-side by both of them. You can kind of see the dimensions are a little bit different. Like around here, you can see that this is thicker. The base of the blade is a bit thicker. So this one's actually heavier, and I kind of prefer the feel of the MMA. One weird thing with the MMA version is the scabbard. If you can see in here, you probably can't, but there's this weird like plastic thing lining it. And there was another one on the other side that kind of held it in place, but they were just glued together, and that eventually kind of popped out and slid out. So like the scabbard's kind of garbage, but the sword itself is not bad. As for the hand and a halves, I feel like they have similar differences as the Italian longswords, but I feel like they're not as noticeable. The non-MMA version is definitely a little bit longer than the MMA version. I mean, I can't really say much about these. They're good, and they're swords. Point of balance is all right. I mean, they're pretty standard. They feel like a typical sword. I don't know how else to describe it. They're not bad. MMA is a bit shorter, a bit lighter, a bit stubbier, it almost feels like, and it does, again, feel better in the hand than the standard variant. Some people don't like the bluing, but I honestly think the MMA feels better in the hand, and they're cheaper. I mean, you can get this for less than the non-MMA variant, and that's a bonus to me, honestly. Scabbard still has that weird issue that the other one does. Honestly, I think this one might be on its way out, too. So now we have the competition cutting sword, which I haven't really seen too many reviews of. The ones on Cult of Athena are like, oh, it's a sword-shaped object. I'm like, you're a sword-shaped object. What is a sword anyway, other than just a big knife? I do worry about the quality of steel on this. Like, there is a little bit of oxidation going on. I have been trying to stay on top of oiling these, but like, you know, things come up and like you go away for a while, and these were in storage for a bit, so I can't do anything about that. But it does give me an idea of like the quality of steel. There is a bit of oxidation. Like there's a mark right there. I'm not sure how that got there. And there's a bit on here on the handle, but like the sword itself is just like so nice in the hand. It just feels good. Like it's so thin and so light for its size. Like, hold on, I want to swing it. Yeah, it's so good. Like you could one hand this easily. MMA arming sword. So I actually sleep with this one because it's so small and compact. Pretty typical. It's your pretty typical one-handed sword. And it's like MMA. It's super light, super whippy. It's not bad. Scabbard does seem to be like marking with some glue or something. I don't know. These scabbards that come with these are a little bit weird, but the swords themselves, again, are really nice. This thing is actually like really nice to hold. I want to swing it. Hold up. Ooh, yes. Let's go. All right, that's it for the cold steel. And I just want to sit and talk about Balor Arms for a bit, okay? I can't find much information about them. They have a Facebook page that they put up after I started like looking up their swords, and they're only sold on Cult of Athena. Like I don't know much about them, so like getting these was a bit of a gamble, but I have some pretty good things to say about these. My biggest concern is the quality of steel, because like some of these have a bit of oxidation going on. This one, I didn't particularly oil all that well, all that often, so that's to be expected. But I mean, if you want historical accuracy, if that's huge to you, all of these pommels are peened on. Like, every single one of these is peened on. There's not a thread on any of these. So if that's something that's important to you, then I mean, like, consider these things. There's also like various revisions that I can't seem to find information on. So this is the 14th century longsword and the 13th to 14th century longsword. And what's funny is, as far as I can tell, they're the exact same sword. The only difference is the guard. So there is already a review on these things about the sag and sort of like the sort of whippiness. It's a valid criticism, but there does need to be a little bit of flex in the blade to be able to like take hits. This is really long. This is like the longest long sword that I own, so I do expect a bit of sag to it. One of the downsides is like the point of balance is a little bit out there, so it's not as whippy as it could be, but if you two-handed this, it would be fine. Same with the 13th, 14th century one. It's the same sword, so that's to be expected. One thing I did notice is like there's these markings on the blade. I'm not entirely certain what that is. I can't seem to scrub them off. I don't think it's oxidation, and it doesn't seem to impact the performance, and honestly, I think it looks kind of cool. Honestly, those two are right, but this one though, oh my goodness, do I have things to say about this. This is the 15th century Italian longsword, which I believe is based off of the same type as the Albion Principe.
This is me from the future. I'm a fucking idiot. It's based off the British Data Spadona, which is an Oakenshaw type 18A or possibly 16. Swords are weird.
And this thing is so light and whippy and just like, it feels so sturdy. I don't know the exact terminology for this sort of blade geometry, but it's kind of like pointed in the middle. And this thing just feels so good. Like the balance on this is so good. So light and whippy. One issue I do have with this, the only issue that I've ever had with this, is the pommel. Kind of like when you're swinging, you can kind of hit yourself with it, which has left some scratches, but like other than that, I fucking love this sword. All right, this is the 12th century Teutonic arming sword, which is actually hilarious because this arming sword is longer than some of my long swords. This thing is absolutely huge. This is basically the same deal as the 13th, 14th century longswords, where like the blade is super long. It has a bit of sag to it, and the point of balance is out there, and I think that's just because the blade is so long. It's not bad. It's not bad. It's got the same blade geometry too. I mean, it's not bad. So this is the 15th century arming sword. This is the first quote unquote real sword that I've owned. This thing is actually sick. I got this one because it was on discount because it was blemished, and I think the blemish is just this mark right here, this little, I don't know, I guess it's a tempering or a burn mark or something, but like this thing is so good. And this is surprisingly light and whippy. Like, I showed the specs to people and they couldn't believe this thing was only 2 pounds. The point of balance is so good on this. Like, it just works. I just want to swing it. Hold up. Ooh, I love that. I love that. I love this sword. Honestly, if you wanted like an entry-level sword, this would probably be like pretty up there on my list of recommendations. It's really nice. Now, this one I haven't had too long. It's another Balor Arms. And I will say, they seem to have stepped up their game with their scabbards. Because the other scabbards, the swords just kind of slide in and they can slide out. This one is actually like really, really well made. It feels way tighter. And the sword itself, it seems to be the same type of sword as the Man-at-Arms arming sword. And that's a really, really wide blade on this. But even then, even with how wide this blade is, like, it's super light. It doesn't have the range as the 15th century arming sword, but like, it's really well balanced again. So that's it for Balor Arms. Next, we have a bunch of like one-offs and no-name brands. Depeeka arming sword. It's Depeeka, so like they don't know. If you care about historical accuracy, this will trigger you to no end. I care more about functionality. It's pretty badly balanced, honestly. I don't know what this thing down here is. It's a bit of like cloth or cotton or something. I don't know. I will say the blade material has held up and hasn't rusted at all. So at least it has that. And I honestly picked this up because it was one of the cheapest options. And I don't regret it because now I know like how a bad sword feels in the hand. Because this thing is really not well balanced at all. Like you can see the point of balance is really out there. This is the Windlass Sword of St. Michael's. People were hyping this thing up and I can see why. It's more of a looks sword than a functional sword. It's a falchion technically. It feels more like a chopper than anything else. Definitely more like a chopper than a cutter thruster. I do like the hand protection it has. Like any hand protection like this is always a bonus. And they managed to do that without throwing the balance off. This is the first sword I ever actually owned. No name brand, quote unquote, arming sword or knightly sword. Damascus arming sword. And I got it because like I heard Damascus steel was like sick. Like honestly, I have been trying to take care of this thing and keep it oiled. But even then, there's rust and oxidation along the blade. Which is a real shame because it doesn't feel bad either. It's like pretty heavy, but like the point of balance is like really good. There's a lot of material in the blade. There's no real taper to it, but I mean, it doesn't feel bad still. And it's the first sword that I've ever actually owned, so it kind of breaks my heart that this thing is kind of falling apart. But I do love it. Like, I do still love this thing. It's kind of ironic that Damascus steel, quote unquote, this is pattern welded. It's kind of ironic that like it's supposed to be the best steel on the planet, and it's the one that's rusting on me. We have the Naval Cutlass, which is sort of a modernized sword. It's kind of like a modernized saber kind of thing. It's got like kind of the same form factor and design as a falchion, except as opposed to the Windlass over there, this one is actually super light, and I do feel like it might fall apart if you use it too much, but it feels so functional. It's got really good hand protection, like it's got the kind of a ring guard kind of thing like a katana, and then it's got the knuckle guard here. And honestly, this thing is really cheap, and for the price, like I'm really happy with this. I actually have gone and like chopped down bushes and stuff with this in the backyard back when I had a place to do that. I've actually sharpened it a few times since it's like the most expendable, cheapest one that I have. Honestly, like this thing, you can't go wrong with this for the price. Now these last two, I don't even want to talk about these. These were marketed as a Damascus rapier, and that's a lot of fucking rust. Same with the Damascus longsword. Like, it's just rusting. Like, what the So, final thoughts. I wish I would have known about HEMA supplies before I started getting into this. They seem to have really good shit. Cold Steel does not deserve the ridiculous rep that they get. Balor Arms, I feel like people need to look into a bit more. The one-offs are just one-offs. Like, what more do you want? I'm gonna go back to playing Zelda now because the freaking Master Sword is so horribly designed and the freaking guard is enormous and the balance would be so off and there's no... It's a video game! I don't care!